Can you guys do this?
Yep, that's a great looking.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a great looking PowerPoint already.
Oh man, that's a big. That's for sure a big league PowerPoint right there.
Was that a transition?
Dude,
Wow.
come on. You know,
If you don't have the exploding one at some point, but like an explosion of fire at some point, I'm gonna be like, no, this isn't the real deal.
RJ, that's our name right there. Isaiah, that's us.
Look at
Explosion
that.
of power. Oh shit!
We made it, boys.
This is custom made. Wow.
Yeah, thanks,
All right.
buddy.
The floor is yours.
If there's any spelling mistakes, just so everyone knows, Wedge only gave me an hour to make it.
Wow.
It's Wedge's fault.
Yeah, I'll wear it.
All right. So again, like you guys said, we're just gonna get into some Rapsodo. So I thought it was gonna be a good place to start by just showing what the actual iPad looks like when a session's going on. Right, so this dashboard that you see right here, I think this is the older generation one. I believe there's a newer update. It's pretty much the same stuff. It's just the interface looks different. So going from left to right, so we'll start off with exit velocity. Obviously, it's how hard you hit the ball. Top right is the max, and then the average here. And then spin. I'll get into spin more on the next slide and how it's kind of actually measured. But this is basically telling a hitter or coach, am I back spinning it? Am I top spinning it? Am I hooking it? And what's actually happening. And then to the right of that would be the launch angle. So launch angle is basically how the ball is leaving the bat at a certain angle. I want to make sure this is out there. Launch angle is not attack angle. They are every ball that you hit has a launch angle. So even if you swing down at the ball and you clip it, it goes up, it's going to have a high launch angle.
It's a good note.
I just wanted to make sure coaches know that and players know that. Because I think, those get confused a little bit sometimes. Next to it is the exit direction. That's basically which part of the field you hit it in. So if you picture second base and center field, that's 0 degrees. To a little bit to the right, so if I'm a left-handed hitter and I pull it, that's going to be positive, and it's going to be down to 45 to the foul line. If I'm a right-handed hitter and I pull it to the left field line, that's going to be negative 45. So it's going to make a right angle. And then from there, you have the pitch data, which is basically, how many hits has that player hit, the pitch count, what's the speed, and where in the strike zone are you hitting that ball. I'll get into what that actual field and the spin looks like with the distance, because there's a little bit more to know with that. So the next slide, we got what's the exit direction. So I kind of alluded to this on the previous slide. So it's basically the horizontal direction that the ball takes in play with the flight. Right side's positive, left side is negative. So this is where it gets, a little bit fun. Basically, the tilt of the ball can show you how you're hitting it. Top spin, it's going to be, so it's like a clock, as you see here. Top spin, you're going to be spinning down to 6. Back spin from a right-handed hitter, as you see, it's going to be, 2 to 8. And then lefty is that 10 and that 4. And then hooked is pretty much side spin, if that makes sense. And then back spun, is back spun. So this is kind of what you see with a little bit more in-depth behind it. Now with spin rate, this is an interesting one because depending on the environment that you're in, you're going to want different ranges, if that makes sense. So with a 3,500 spin rate, basically that miss hit is creating too much backspin, resulting in lower exit velocity and carry. So you're overspinning it, if that makes sense. Usually where you're in a higher, specificity or training environment where it's actually like real pitch, live BP, mixed pitch, you don't really know what's coming. Between 1,500 and 3,000 is kind of, or 2,500 is kind of where you want to sit. I like when it's just regular BP, the lower the spin, the better. That means I'm squaring that baseball up.
Makes sense.
Right. So I think at times a lot of people like, hey, I want to backspin that, where, now they're overspinning it, or their bat's coming through a zone a certain way, and it's actually getting negatively affected by the environment that they're in. So I'll allude to this later on in the presentation, but there can be cool ways to engage the player in squaring up baseballs in a BP setting. So again, I kind of alluded to this, but basically how it's spinning, you'll see it in the corner of the dashboard. And it's pretty self-explanatory of which way it's spinning and how that happened. So, if it's backspun, coach can think critically, okay, is his bat going through the zone a good way? Then yeah, we're good. If it's hooked, what was wrong with it? Now you have to ask more questions. So
Transition.
like I
That's
said,
beautiful.
I only had an hour, man. So
Beautiful.
so I wanted to get into some of the distance stuff. So distance is going to be affected by all these things that I have connected to it. So exit direction, spin rate, launch angle, and exit velocity. If you've taken physics, like 10, physics 11, you should know a little bit about this. So basically, now what you see is this line. So these two lines. So you'll see the strike zone and where the ball left that strike zone. So the collision with the bat. The dotted line is without the effective spin, and then the solid line is actually true trajectory. So what the ball actually did in real time, right? So what we can now understand is, okay, what did spin do to that ball? If I overspun it or if I top spun it, did it die, right? Or did it go farther? So as coaches, now we can ask the question is, what is the bat doing coming through the zone to create that spin, right? Am I on time? Am I off time? Is my vertical bat angle too much? Am I too steep to it? So as the times or the swings or the sessions go and you start seeing consistent spins and spin profiles, you can be like, okay, well, now I can dig a little deeper in what's actually going on with the bat kinematics, if that makes sense. All right, so with all this, so that's like real-time sessions. And then after you're done, you basically get reports. So it has all your standard stuff, your spray charts, and then what it looks like. It basically breaks it down with dribblers, which is right in front of the plate, ground balls, which is obviously a launch angle that's lower than, I think it was 8. And then a low line drive, which is, a 10-degree launch angle, and then a higher line drive, you're looking at 20. Fly ball is over, I believe it's over like 40 or something like that. And then a pop-up's just like something clipped at like 50 launch angles. So that's kind of how it's like broken up in terms of that. And then color coded there. So obviously the more colors you have, it kind of gives you a better understanding, if that makes sense. Usually the dribblers that you would see here, those are probably just bunts to start the round. So with that being said, you have to kind of, understand what's happening in those sessions. So even just making a note of it or going back and just deleting it is something, because it will negatively affect the exit velocity. As you see here, his exit velocity is 59. And I can tell you this player does not hit the ball 59. So
based on that exit velocity high, there's no way.
It's a lot of bunt work.
Exactly. Yeah, so those are some stuff that we always have to like take in consideration when looking through some of this data. expected WOBA, so that basically just takes batted ball metrics and takes the defense out of it. So that's good to look at. And then ropes, streak, all that kind of stuff. It's explained at the very, I think it's the third page over in the actual Rapsodo app. Nothing that I really look at too much, but it's good for coaches that want to dig into it a little bit deeper. This is something I do like is the heat map. Basically, it tells you, kind of where you're doing damage in practice, and then you can then start, if you have the data, you can start correlating that with what you're doing in game as well. So basically, this is kind of what Rapsodo gives you. So at the pro level, this is, I think, based on medians. Yeah, medians of the age groups. This is usually what you'll see. So pro, exit velocity 90, launch angle 14.8, spin at 1900, and then distance at 210. And then you see as you get younger, those numbers kind of drop a little bit, except for the launch angle. That goes up just because some of the guys aren't, obviously at 12 years old, aren't strong enough to maintain angles, and you'll lead to higher attack angles and more fly balls.
That bat dropping behind their shoulder a little bit, that kind of thing.
Yep.
I see that a lot with like 12 to 14-year-olds, especially. Like once they go through that load, that bat just escapes, and so that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's pretty good it's a good idea to use some underload bats, just so they can understand how to keep tension or take slack out of their system, because there's too often I saw when I was working at UBC that some of these players had bats that are way too heavy because dad thought it was cool or they thought it was cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think every dad who plays baseball always is like, "Oh no, I want my kid to hit with a wood bat." You're like,
Oh my
"Yeah,
God.
man, I get it." You know what? But like some kids can, but like other kids, you're like, "Yeah, man, you're just not there yet, bro. I'm sorry."
Is it even necessary, really? I mean,
Well, that's fair. That's fair.
like
I think there's something about swinging a heavier bat if you can handle it. Like
that's the overload though, right? Like
right.
Most of the time kids swing only overload because it's like Justin's saying, they'll get a big bat, or even sometimes like parents who only want to buy one bat every 3 years. So they get a big one so that the kid will grow into it, kind of thing. So I'm sure will have its benefits, but at the same time, their swing itself is probably losing a little bit when they can't control the thing that they're trying to swing.
Yeah, and I think, regardless of any implement or variation that you're giving to your athletes, you need to have a why behind it, right? I think, the younger they are, they're not as strong and they can't keep tension in the right spot. So it makes sense to give them a little bit lighter of an implement. If you're older and you need to, implement heavier bats, and do it. Adding some of that variation is good for people to learn some skills. So next year, it's essentially the same kind of thing that we looked at, but now it's just different way to look at it. So different visuals. Again, I'll look mostly at exit velocity, launch angles, and exit direction or spray charts, and compare it usually to what's happening in the game. And then I think the challenge is always, how can you design some practice environments to take them now to what you're seeing in the game, if that makes sense. So training more specificity, and allowing them to transfer some skills, and then using those kind of, and just, allowing this to paint bigger pictures. So next we'll move on to my transitions get a little bit better here.
Beautiful.
So this is the one of the last pages. Again, it's just, this is over time. So I don't look too much at how they break down their classifications in that. I'll look more at like the progress. So the EV tracker. So you see there, it's like week 0 to week 25 to week 50. are we getting better? Are we getting worse? What are we doing in practice? What are they doing in the game? Are the drills working? Or are they not? So it's just a way to kind of, keep yourself honest and have some conversations with the players, and see, are we actually getting better? So at the very end of the iPad, and I believe if you print off the PDF, they'll tell you what all these mean. I'm not going to go through them all. If you guys really want to understand, you can even Google it or go on Rapsodo.com and read it for yourselves. To the stuff that I really like doing, and this is, I'm in the business of player development, and I absolutely love it. So I think using tech like this allows us to individualize player programs and identify some key performance indicators. So like, what are we going to be working on? And then allowing us to track their development throughout time. So these are some things that, I look at. So basically, are the launch or their exit velocity over 90? Is their launch angle in a certain window? And is their spin a certain range? Usually good hitters are pretty good within those ranges right there. That means, they're hitting the ball hard, they're hitting it on a line, and they're hitting it in the air. As you see underneath here, this is just an example of something that you can use to track stuff, right? So correlations and basically, are we getting better? Or are we getting worse? I think it's really important to note too, when you're going through some of this stuff and building out the KPIs, this is where you have to integrate a lot of different departments. So if you have an S&C coach or a mental coach or someone else, that's where you can now, sit down and, hey, this is what I'm seeing in his batted ball metrics or subjectively on his video. What are you seeing, right? And then building this in through his plan, if it's med ball work or, some stability work, and actually like individualize what he's going to be doing. I think, that's the way player development should kind of be looked at, like kind of a player centric model, and that's going to take everyone in your department to work together and ultimately, make that individualized player or individual player better, which ultimately, ends to some wins at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So this is again probably why how I use it mostly. So with core beliefs, I usually do this through task constraints. So under task constraints, the learner can improve transferability of skills because they'll have to adapt their coordination patterns to new performance contexts. It's clear that the most important benefit for learners is that they learn basically by making their own solutions to different constraints in the environment or through a task. So simply put, the player needs rules, drills, and equipment and goals. And it's up to us coaches to facilitate those environments in an implicit way so they can actually self-explore and find out what works best for them. There is no ideal technique. I think, there's a study Nikolai Bernstein did on a hammer. Basically, he took it back and it was just not the same technique all the time. The only thing that was the same is hitting the nail, which was the end point. So I think that's, something to kind of consider. Obviously that's another rabbit hole to kind of down with some skill acquisition stuff. But I think, obviously there's some spots in the swing and phases that we need to hit on the principles, but to tell one guy he needs to hit like this and another to hit like that, well, you don't know how he moves, because how Wedge moves is different, how Isaiah moves is different, how I move it different, how RJ moves. So this is why putting them into like a constraint-led environment allows them to find their own way to do something. And I think this is how you kind of can get back to practicing the actual game, and the demand and what are the demands of the game, right? So executing certain things, leverage counts compared to two-strike approach. How can we put this in BP where now you're giving more contextual information to that hitter, like, hey, you're 3-1, but this is how you got to 3-1, right? So he went, change up down, curveball down, fastball, right? And okay, you let him do his thing. Now he's got to hit a launch angle or X velocity over this. If he doesn't do it, then you can have a conversation with him, ask him questions, and kind of see where his head is at. So these are some things that I've used before. So launch angle games, so basically hit this ball in this launch angle, certain number of points wins, exit velocity games. So I like exit velocity ladder, where low intent first swing, say you hit 30 miles an hour, and then each time you have to get better and better and better. And whoever can get the most steps will win that game. Really there, you're understanding, as a player, you start to understand the intent that you have to swing at to produce high exit velocities. A lot of time, high intent will lead to like spinning off balls and actually have lower exit velocity because there's a lot of stuff that goes wrong when you're really max effort. So I think that allows them to, find out for themselves kind of where their gauge should be at. Point of impact games. This is an interesting one. If you only have Rapsodo, I think there's a couple ways you can kind of look at this. Obviously, there's some other technologies out there that allow you to look into this a little bit deeper. But so I'll look at spin direction. So basically, like if I'm a right-handed hitter and I'm hitting it at 3 o'clock, so it's spinning like on a clock to 3. That means I'm chasing the pole, right? So I'm going this way. So that means I think we were all told this at one point in college, but hit the ball the other way, and they're really like pushy and forcing it, and it's kind of dying, right? So that's showing that there's some sort of bath path wrong. So the ball would spin 3 o'clock, and then the other way if it's hooked, right? So that means you're kind of probably coming out and around or you're early. So it just allows you to play within those kind of parameters of allowing them to self-explore and see that kind of feedback. And then spin rate games, which I alluded to earlier in the conversation, and just squaring it up, especially depending on the environment that you're in. If it's flips, a lot of people can do it. I'm sorry. I can get someone off the street to go and hit something. To be honest, I think the higher specificity you can train at, the more transfer you're going to have. So some mixed pitch, different angles, like adding some variability and some challenge, I think is the better way to do it. Now, you also have to understand motivation and confidence and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's about learning more rather than preparing or training to maintain, if that makes sense.
It does. I would say it does.
Yeah. So
Questions. All right.
That's that.
Open up the floodgate.